Hello.
Hello.
Good. Hello, everyone. Welcome to From Common Lands to Second Nature, the scholarship of Richard Judd and the future of Eastern environmental history. Thank you all so much for being here today. My name is Eileen, and as an environmental historian and a doctoral candidate in history in the history department here at Maine, who, like several others here in this room today, have worked with Professor Judd since beginning the master's program in 2011. And you can see a fun picture of some of us with Dick on our way to a conference a few years back. Sorry if anyone feels that picture is unflattering. I'm so excited to have been able to play a role in organizing this panel. I can't think of a more hardworking, kind, and patient advisor, and anyone who knows Professor Judd also knows that he's never been one to self-promote. He was probably embarrassed beyond belief when he got wind of what we were planning, but here we are. Sorry, Dick. In all seriousness, Professor Judd really does prefer, as he has said many times in the past, to just put his head down and, quote, do the work. And his dedication to scholarship is reflected in that work in so many ways. As such, I'm truly honored to be one of his graduate students and to have benefited from his insights and his support over the years. My colleague Payne will be up here in a moment to introduce all of the panelists and share a few of his own words about Professor Judd. But as UMaine History Department tradition dictates, someone must introduce the introducer. First, however, I wanted to very quickly express my gratitude to the following. First, to the panelists, all of whom have traveled from afar to participate in this event. To Chad Montree at UMass Lowell, who first came up with this idea, came up with the idea for this panel, but couldn't be a part of it due to various scheduling conflicts. To the UMaine History Department and the History Graduate Student Association for their generous sponsorship of this event. Their funding made it possible to offer the glorious snack spread that you all have no doubt taken notice of in the back of the room. Please continue to help yourselves. To those of you who helped promote this event by circulating flyers and emails through word of mouth, to those who couldn't be here in person but are tuning in via YouTube live stream right now, hello, if any of you are actually there. I think we have one person. I think there will be more. To those who couldn't be here those people. To Payne for lending his event planning expertise and for agreeing to chair and sort of low-key moderate this panel. But perhaps most of all to Emma Schrader, who is another doctoral candidate in this department and has been a fantastic co-conspirator through all of this. Emma did an immense amount of work securing this room we're all gathered in today, as well as the refreshments we're all enjoying, the parking passes and honorariums for panelists, and countless other details that I've probably overlooked. And moreover, she is just generally a really nice person to work with. Without her, this event could not have happened. And as the kids are fond of saying nowadays, you're the real MVP, Emma. So let's give these folks a round of applause. Now I'm very pleased to introduce Payne, who is an associate professor of history at Bridgewater State University. For many of us in the history department here at UMaine, Professor Payne needs little introduction. He earned his PhD from our program in 2006. His dissertation, entitled Fishing a Borderless Sea, Environmental Territorialism in the North Atlantic, 1871 to 1910, was later published as a monograph by Michigan State University in 2010. He has authored numerous articles on the maritime history of New England and Atlantic Canada, covering topics ranging from fisheries regulation and stewardship to labor systems within the region's fish processing industry. He has presented at dozens of conferences in the field and has collaborated extensively with other scholars, helping to found the organization Northeast Atlantic Region Environmental History, also known as NEAR-EH, formerly known as NACHIF. His current projects include Editing the Ocean, The Culture and Politics of Seafood Consumption in Canada, 1900 to 1950, Relief Feeding, Food and Poverty Politics in the United States, Canada, and Great Britain, and several co-edited volumes, among them Nature Reclamation in New England, A Story of Rewilding the East, a project he shares with McKenzie, who is also here today, and The Greater Gulf, an environmental history of the Gulf of St. Lawrence, which is under contract with McGill Queen's University Press. He has also in the past served as an associate editor for the Bridgewater Review, Maine History, and the U.S.-Canadian Public Policy Journal. Professor Payne was a 2016 to 2017 recipient of a U.S. Fulbright Foundation Fellowship for Educational Exchange between Canada and the United States, and he has earned numerous teaching awards, including the Outstanding Faculty Award for the Honors Program at Bridgewater State in spring of 2015, and the Rising Star Faculty Award at Old Dominion University in spring of 2010. He also currently serves as a graduate program coordinator for the history department at Bridgewater State, and this spring began serving as a grievance officer for the Bridgewater chapter of the Massachusetts College Teachers Association, an organization he has been active in since at least 2014. So basically, go to Brian Payne if you have a problem or if you just feel like complaining. All jokes aside, his problem-solving abilities and his ability to bring people together really did play a role in making this event possible today, and we are very grateful to have him here with us. And now, without further ado, I'll hand this thing over to Professor Payne. Take it away, Brian, and may the 4th be with you. Sorry, I have to
Thank you for that introduction. That was everything I've ever done. I'm a little sad. I'm a little confused. I thought there'd be some kind of big throne that we would make Dick sit on throughout this whole thing. So I'm a little disappointed about that, but otherwise everything was great. Thank you for that. Thank you for inviting me. I'm happy to have the opportunity to introduce our panels and to moderate the discussion afterwards. None of the people on this panel need any kind of introduction, but it has fallen to me the responsibility of providing some anyway. So I'll do so very quickly and then shut up and let them say the really smart stuff. Before I get to that, though, I'd just like to take one moment to point out that of the 5 of us who are up here, I'm the only one to have actually sat in a seminar as a student of Professor Richard Judd, and had the great fortune of having Dick on both my MA and PhD committees, even though he might be trying to block that memory out. I distinctly remember the day when my own advisor, Scott C., told me that I had to take a graduate seminar class with Dick Judd, largely because he was the only New England historian in the department at that time. Dick was scheduled to teach his environmental history graduate seminar that semester, and I had absolutely no interest in environmental history, and I loathed the idea of taking an entire seminar on tree huggers. Needless to say, I went in begrudgingly. Within 5 minutes, I was completely hooked. Looking back, I now know that I did, in fact, have a strong environmental ethic, but as a member of a white working class, I had previously thought environmentalism was something kids from Berkeley did, or hippies in other places around the country. Environmentalism was certainly not something that was talked about over the dinner table in my family of blue-collar Reagan Republicans, and if it was not often a positive interpretation of what environmentalism was. But Dick showed me the important intersection between labor and environmental history that has since shaped my academic work, and for that I am deeply grateful. Dick showed me that my memories as a child driving past on my way to my family's house, driving past all the factories, the chemical processing plants in Niagara Falls, New York, working in Love Canal as part of the opening of Love Canal, tearing up asbestos tiles from my dad's floor covering business, and helping past employers cover things up just before OSHA inspectors showed up, all had very important environmental history components to them that I was never fully able to comprehend until Dick showed me those important connections. But there are far more important people here today than me that are going to talk about Dick Judd's academic work, and I'd like to jump into my introductions of our speakers. I'll introduce them all now, and then we'll let them give their talks, and then we'll have an open conversation after they present their discussions. Matt McKenzie joins us from the University of Connecticut, where he's been teaching New England environmental and maritime history since 2006. Matt is the author of Clearing the Coastline and the forthcoming work Breaking the Banks, along with over a dozen articles and book chapters that span disciplinary boundaries. Matt has taken his academic work into the realm of public policy as a member of the New England Fisheries Management Council and the International Council for the Exploration of the Sea. Matt will bring forward his expertise on interdisciplinary research, which often bridges the gap between humanities, science, and public policy, and speak to us today about how Dick's work established a firmer foundation for the Maritime Peninsula's environmental history, while also touching on the important role played by both science and history in public policy debate. Kate Viens is the Director of Research at the Massachusetts Historical Society, home to the Boston Environmental History Seminar. Kate has been with the Massachusetts Historical Society since 2009 after serving in numerous public history venues across Massachusetts and Rhode Island. The list of consulting work, editorial work, exhibition work, and such is far too lengthy to capture in this brief introduction. She's also currently finishing up her PhD on the Massachusetts railroad industry at the University of Boston. Kate will tap into this rich and diverse experience to discuss how Professor Richard Judd's work has enriched the field of environmental history. In addition, as a doctoral candidate with a field in environmental history, she will describe the influence of Dick's scholarship on her own work. Finally, as a proud parent of a Black Bear alumni, Bachelor in Science and Environmental Science in 2012 from the Honors College, she looks forward to thanking Professor Judd for the ways in which he has contributed to the intellectual rigor and the supportive educational environment that the University of Maine offers to its students. John Cumbler, recently 2015, retired from a long and successful career at the University of Louisville. John is the author of 7 books that, like Dick Judd, began in labor history and transitioned into environmental history. His latest work is on the environmental history of his beloved Cape Cod. John will talk about how Dick represents environmental historians who came out of the labor social history field and how that informed his work and the field of environmental history more generally. Finally, Brian Donahue joins us from Brandeis University, where he has been teaching environmental history since 1997. Brian has written and co-authored numerous books, articles, and chapters on environmental history and policy, with a particular focus on sustainable agriculture and food production. Most notably are Reclaiming the Commons and the Great Meadows. Brian brings with him great intimate knowledge of working with the landscape, and perhaps can best speak on Dick's influence on the role of common people played in managing and protecting common lands. So thank you all for coming to Orono today to roast Dick Judd. That's what we're doing, right? No? Well, I'm going to have to make some edits. Okay, to honor Dick Judd, is what it meant, for his exceptional work as a scholar, a teacher, and perhaps most important to me, a mentor of students and academics across the United States, Canada, and even beyond. So let's start with Matt.
So I want to thank the organizers for inviting me to be here today to honor Dick Judd. I came to Dick Judd's knowledge and his work relatively late in my career, thank God, because if I had to sit in one of his seminars, I probably wouldn't finish grad school. So thank you for coming to my world late, but it's better late than never, I suppose. Like many of us, I came to know Dick Judd through his work. I recall reading in a cold sweat his Common Lands, Common People, realizing that the project I was then well into was proving to be nothing more than a long-winded footnote to this magnificent study of rural farmers and hunters and development of a 19th century conservation ethic. What I also noted quite powerfully in that book, and in his Untitled Garden, was his sense of New England exceptionalism. Dick's work, I think I can say, all focuses around the fact that there was something different and special and unique about this corner of the continent. In his books and articles, I found a shared view about the particular role this region played in American social, cultural, and ecological development. But Dick knew how and why this happened. I did not. And over the past decade, however, through his work, I've come to see things far more clearly than I could have ever done so before, and articulated far more cogently than ever I probably will be able to do in the future. Dick's focus on a specific place, throughout a specific time in particular, brought New England's distinctiveness into clearer focus for me. While he has concentrated most of his work on northern New England, his writings speak to a larger region that, in second nature, he dubbed the Maritime Peninsula. Defined loosely as the lands falling south of the St. Lawrence and east of the Hudson, I would exclude any areas that had Yankees fans in them. I gotta be right. He put into concrete geographic terms a cultural zone that, while far from uniform, shared far more across an international border than what was what that border was trying to keep apart. In many ways, this approach is not new. Indeed, inklings of such a view stretch back to Francis Parkman and others before him, but unlike Parkman and others, Dick rooted his views not in romantic notions of shared Englishness or conflict with Native American groups or some other intangible unifying thread. For Dick, what united this region was a shared experience through time. New England, Atlantic Canada, and southern portions of Quebec all shared at roughly the same time, 400 years ago, what he called the pioneering moment. The economic, cultural, social, and ecological responses that unfolded since that moment created a dialogue between people and place. That dialogue, in turn, as Dick has shown, has shaped in profound and evocative ways the evolution of our region's unique emotional, economic, and cultural attitudes towards wilderness and the non-human species that surround us. Indeed, this is what I feel Dick has really accomplished in our field, revealing the shared trajectory since the pioneering moment, for better or for worse, that has defined this region across borders, not by them. The pioneering moment is fairly easily defined, when North American lands and resources were ripped out of Native American productive practices and pulled headlong into European market production. Check, got that. The moment appeared most visibly in cleared forest lands and European-style agricultural production. Tendrils of that process emerged earlier, however, as scholars such as Chris Pastori, Peter Pope, and Andrew Littman have all recently demonstrated. But it was a head-on engagement with North American forests and the work needed to make them productive in European-style manner that marked the impactful forces of pioneering activity. While most other early American scholars see this moment as a material one, wherein American lands became something in part of a European larger economic field, Dick traced how this moment shaped colonial consciousness, an immaterial, spiritual almost, scientific thought, and ultimately spiritual inclinations. As he argued in Second Nature, the transcendentalists in the 19th century in many ways represented New Englanders' attempts to blend these two things, the experience with the forests with a sense of spirituality and faith and logic that forest elicited deeper in their souls. It's a vision that explains a lot about the cultural present of the Maritime Peninsula. Our non-human species, because of our long history of use and abandonment, fall far short of the pure wilderness that other scholars of the environmental history of the US and Canadian West often invoke. But that doesn't make them any less important for us, as places where we can meet the sublime, the non-human, and the natural. Indeed, what Dick's work illustrates most clearly is that residents of the Maritime Peninsula have come to love nature not as a material object existing beyond us, but rather as a series of processes. We value the work in clearing land, carefully and selectively, then using those resources with a mindfulness and respect that has culminated in our region's tradition of craftsmanship. We embrace farm fields that, while clearly a product of human labor and choices, still remind us every spring of the power of life to rise again and provide sustenance and joy to all of us. And spring has arrived in Southern Europe. Hang on, it's coming, I promise you. And Dick's work has often reminded us, we often return to these reforested areas, once used by humans, but now recolonized by non-human life of our hosts, for the recreation and nurturing of our human soul. Our region's cultural emphasis upon getting into the woods does not need old growth forests, although there are still very few parcels of them still around. We can make do with 6th and 7th forests if that's what's available to us. In those, we can still find the same peace, calm, perspectives, and knowledge of ourselves and of the larger ecosystem of which we are part by returning to those areas that illustrate it to us. As Thoreau put it, we go to the places where nature makes men's work wax. Now, Brian reminded me on the drive up that I was also supposed to talk about science and public policy. So this is where I start winging it. Where does this, on land, this is a very clear process. We know colonists arrived 400 years ago and started putting the land to soil, clearing it. But most of my work deals with the Gulf of Maine and the marine resource management. And I would argue, because of Dick's pinpointing identification of the pioneering moment, that has provided a very important tool for scientists and policy and decision makers in how we view marine resource management in the Gulf of Maine and in southern New England. While the pioneer moment may have passed 400 years ago on land, I would argue that it passed in the Gulf of Maine only about 20 years ago. That if you look at behavior, if you look at how people use and view resources, the catch as catch can, the freedom of maneuver outside the bounds of civilization, beyond a frontier. That pioneering moment lasted well until the 1990s, when I would argue a convergence of forces, GPS technology, and the fact that that GPS technology now allowed us to start going to the exact same spot time and time again in the ocean to see what's happening. That allowed us to start, for better or worse, put boxes on the ocean floor and in the water column itself. We haven't quite gotten to the point at sea where we are on land, where we are working with natural processes to allow for recovery, reforestation, to allow that dialogue between humans and the non-human world to exist in creating something new. Marine scientists use this term recovery. I think Dick would caution against that, as he makes very clear in his book, Second Nature. The reforested landscape is not a recovered landscape. It's something that's totally new. It's curated. It's different. It's not less natural. It's just it embodies something of us in it. We're getting to that at sea. We've just established some marine protected, well, I'm not supposed to say marine protected areas, conservation zones, habitat management areas in the Gulf of Maine, that promise to deliver some of this, to allow that process to start to work, to try to rebuild some of the stocks that we've fished out. And so when we think about behaviors and attitudes and scientific inclinations towards the marine environment, that moment, this idea of the pioneer moment, is very, very important for us because it marks a signal turn in behavior and consciousness. That's something managers and scientists are only just starting to figure out. Fishermen have been there for a long time, some have, some haven't, but it's what we need to change culturally that will, I think, bring back the marine resources that this region needs to bring back. So I would argue, in short, that Dick's work allows us to see that in this particular place, a united space, and this is true for New England as much as it is for Atlantic Canada, where attitudes about that pioneering moment and how a dialogue exists between people and the non-human world really has to be a force by which we can, again, not recover, but bring something back that we had once tilled over. Ultimately, I think Dick's work shows us that we aren't nearly as big as we think we are, frankly. I mean, when you walk through some of these reforested lands, I feel very small. But we're big enough to foul things up if left to our own devices. What Dick's work has shown me was and remains the power of what we can do if we harness that energy outside of ourselves to bring something new about and be okay with that. That's really what I think Dick has done for our field and for the understanding of the environmental history of this region. It is different, it is new, and it's because that it is all of ours that I think it's going to make a huge difference. Thank you, Dick, and thank you all.
Good afternoon. I'd like to thank the History Department, Emma and Eileen, for their invitation to reflect on Dick's influential career and the direction of environmental history today. I'd like to thank my fellow panelists for sharing their ideas. And most of all, I'm delighted to have the chance to say congratulations and thank you to Dick in person on my own behalf and on behalf of the Massachusetts Historical Society. In some ways, the environment of the MHS itself could not be more different from that of Orono. In the heart of Back Bay, the marble halls of our building overlook a stream of car traffic. Outside our door, Berkeley College students wheel their musical instruments down a sidewalk crowded with Red Sox fans making their way to Fenway Park. But as many of you know, the MHS too is an important place to research, write, and discuss environmental history. Since 2001, the Boston Environmental History Seminar, hosted by the MHS, has given faculty and students from throughout the region the opportunity to receive feedback on their works in progress. The series meets 7 times during the academic year. Dick and our fellow panelists have all participated as presenters, commentators, and faithful attendees. It was almost exactly a year ago that Dick commented on a paper by Jason Newton of Syracuse University, The Winter Workscape, Weather and the Meaning of Industrial Capitalism in the Northern Forest, 1850 to 1950, a program that ironically had been postponed due to snow. Dick has always generously been willing to drive down from Orono to take part in the seminar. And this is a service to the MHS and the field for which we are very grateful. And I'm pleased to announce that next year, Dick's student Mike Brennan will present his work on environmental racism and environmental justice in Boston in the seminar series. In 2006, the Society organized the conference Remaking Boston, and Brian Donahue gave a keynote address. In 2009, the University of Pittsburgh Press published the essay collection Remaking Boston, An Environmental History of the City and Its Surroundings, edited by Conrad Wright of the MHS and Tony Penna of Northeastern University. And in 2012, when Dick, Tony, Matt, Brian, and others organized the Northeast and Atlantic Canada Environmental History Workshop, the MHS was honored to host its inaugural meeting. And I was fortunate to present my own work in the program last year at Avery Point, and to receive comments from Dick and other valued colleagues. Not to be outdone by our programming, the MHS Collections Department makes important environmental history resources available to scholars. I know that many of you have been drawn to our rich collection of colonial records, but our 20th century holdings are especially important. These include the records of the Environmental League of Massachusetts and the Massachusetts Audubon Society, Henry Foster's oral history interviews with former secretaries of the Massachusetts Executive Office of Environmental Affairs, and the papers of Francis Sargent, Gary Studds, and Leverett Saltonstall. To support scholars working in the archives, the MHS Research Department awards fellowships. And we gave one of our recent grants to Dick's student Dan Soucier for his project on conflict in the northern borderlands during the American Revolution. So you see the pattern that I'm establishing here, both of Dick's own active scholarship and the generations of scholars with whom he's worked and whom he's mentored. So I think you can see why I'm here as a representative of the Massachusetts Historical Society. The MHS is strongly invested in environmental history collections and the environmental history community. We've especially valued our relationship with the University of Maine History Department, with Dick, and with generations of his students. However, I'd like to turn now to describe for you the impact that Dick has had on my own work as a scholar. Dick's influence has reached me directly in conversations, through his extensive published scholarship, through the generations of colleagues whom he's influenced, and through his service to the university. Some of you, well, all of you, now that Brian gave the introduction, are aware that I'm a PhD candidate in American and New England Studies at Boston University. And I'm writing a dissertation on the development of Massachusetts railroads in the 1830s and their relationship to industrialization and improvements in villages and rural areas following the War of 1812. I'm working with Sarah Phillips, with whom I read Environmental History Field, and with Andy Robichaux. For me, as an American Studies scholar, environmental history sits at the center of a constellation of fields that include American literature and art, material culture, including landscapes and the built environment. I'm thinking about the theories of J.D. Jackson, and historical archaeology, as well as environmental science. Apart from his collaborations with colleagues in other fields in his essay collections and his other work, Dick's unique contribution to environmental history has resonated in these other fields in ways that are vitally important. The narrative of environmental history, American environmental history, is focused on the American West, and it picks up this hyperbole as it moves toward the Pacific Ocean, from the Big Muddy to the Great Salt Lake, to the Grand Canyon, not to be outdone by the Grand Tetons, to the giant sequoias. And Euro-Americans rose to the challenge of this expanse with devastating consequences for Native communities. They invented the Winchester and Wells Fargo, the highway network and the Hoover Dam, the cavalry, soldier and the cowboy, the miner and the miscellany.